good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you are all doing well today, and I want to thank you for joining us. And so we're going to have a little bit briefer of a presentation. I really want to leave time for everyone to be able to have conversation and ask questions and learn from each other as part of this process. I do want to thank CMind for inviting me, and for Maya and Carrie for their assistance in bringing this together. But I want to just give you an idea of what my intentions are for the time that we're together. So we're going to do an opening practice. I'm going to talk about why this topic choice, the idea of classroom rituals, why this idea of beginning with wholeness and ending with joy. And then I'm going to share just a few examples about the structure of my Black Feminisms class, which was a graduate class, and then leave what I hope to be plenty of time for questions and answer. And we will have a closing practice as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm not sure at this moment if, although my webcam is shared on my screen, I'm not sure whether or not you all can see me, but in any case, as we finish up the practice, I'm going to let you know when I'm actually going to turn my webcam off, because I find that that actually provides a better way for us to have just more transmission power. For those of you, just in case there are any of you who are new to contemplative practices, I just want to offer a definition that I share with my various communities, and one that I've found helpful for myself, and just thinking about contemplative practice as an activity that helps you to be still, to reflect, to create, to use and sustain different modes of inquiry and action that can lead to deeper understanding of and connection to oneself and environment. Always the focus for me is doing the deeper level of work wherever we are in the space to understand how we connect to one another, particularly to other sentient beings. And for those of you, again, who may be new to contemplative practices, checking out CMind's website, there's a lot of stuff on there, particularly the contemplative practice tree that I like to use and share with others. I'm going to pretty much keep to my notes so that we can remain on time and also be very focused about what we're talking about today. So the beauty of contemplative practices is that they can be done anywhere. What you're looking at in front of you is a bench. It's a bench in a garden, and we'll come to this garden later. But just for this moment, I want you to imagine yourself in this lovely garden, sitting on this bench. It's a beautiful day in Bloomington, Indiana today. It will rain tomorrow. Some of you may be in places where it's already snowed and it's icy. So just for this moment, just imagine yourself in this lovely garden. And if you are able to do so, close your eyes. And I'm inviting us to breathe deeply together, to think about nothing except what joy it is to be surrounded by so many living and sentient beings who mean us no harm. Just for this moment, this is our lives, surrounded by warmth, love, breath, sky, earth, a community, breathing without rushing, breathing without concern. And so let's just take a moment and 3 deep breaths together, inhaling through our nose, and holding, and exhaling. Inhaling, and hold, and exhale. And again, inhaling, and hold, and exhale. And just take a moment, see how your breath is feeling, how it's settled, or perhaps resettled. I'm going to turn off my camera now, and then I'll return with the camera actually for questions and answers. So when I was invited to offer this webinar and talking to Maya about the possible topics I could offer, I began to think first about how in the past year my teaching had become even more about the practice of a reflection on being human. So I'm a scholar of the slave trade and particularly the Middle Passage. And so the question I'm always asking of others is, what does it mean to be human? What does that entail? And so I thought about what had made it necessary in that year to this year and last year to bring into even fuller view the ways I integrate my living with my teaching. That can be a challenge, as I'm sure that many of you experience yourselves. And as you can imagine, I had a lot to think about. In the months leading to and after the election, our campus, just as many other campuses and local communities, experienced direct violence, including an attack on my department and other departments by white supremacist groups. And before the election, I had visited Juba, South Sudan, to help co-create a master's in teaching emergencies with colleagues who had already been working with the university in Juba and working with students there. This was my first time visiting Africa. I was welcomed by a professor with these words, no lie: "Thank you for coming to our hell. Thank you for being with us." And so, as you can also imagine, I'm still working through these experiences, and I do that through poetry, but having had a lot of time to just contemplate, what does that mean? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be in these spaces that are fraught with so much violence? In addition, of course, after the election, there were levels of hopelessness and fear and apathy that were rising everywhere. But at the same time, I found that there was an urgency. People had discovered an urgency for the work that they were doing and needed to do the work so that they could ensure that a change was actually going to happen. And finally, I kept asking myself and others, what if you could choose joy and be joyful? And I received a response. Students asked me to advise the Black Joy Collective, a group that decided they wanted to focus on their lives through the lens of joy instead of violence and suffering. So a very deliberate attempt to change the narrative that we were reading and hearing. So with so much happening, I needed to have at least one place where I could alter time and space on an ongoing basis, and something that would incrementally lead us to deeper reflection about what was happening and what we could reasonably do to not feel so isolated, alone, helpless, and abused. Because of course, during times of crisis, we do feel these ways. That meant for me giving space to students to tell their stories, even if it meant setting aside the syllabus. So each year, and again, I know many faculty and staff and community workers and artists who do this, if you have a syllabus, it really becomes a living organic syllabus. And so I have a living organic syllabus to accommodate learning and the encroachment of world events. So that means during teaching a class the day after Philando Castile's death, that we altered this syllabus, invited unexpected and unsuspecting people into our class to have conversations about this. It also means that students get to develop their own assessments based on what they have learned during the year. So for me, the classroom has become a liminal and realized space of social action and deep personal work. And when I say classroom, I don't necessarily always mean a classroom within an academic institution. It's really a place of learning wherever it is that I am. And as a result, classroom rituals became important and continue to be important because they help us establish the importance of the work that we're about to undertake, either as individuals and certainly together. And that importance can also lead to a sacredness. It invites everyone in the class to participate however they are able, and sometimes when they are able to do so, knowing that they can enter and they can exit the conversation without obligation. It also means that the rituals themselves, whatever they are that I may be doing, and that can be writing, and it could be as simple as beginning the class with a meditation, they incorporate silence as a response. I think about that often in having listened to a performance done by Billie Holiday at Carnegie Hall, where after she finished singing, there's almost a full minute of silence before the audience begins clapping. Really a response of honor, but an appreciation. And so classroom rituals also encourage reflection. They provide continuity and refuge for those who are working within the space, and they create an opportunity to have. The one thing that I've learned is that they also allow us to bring fully ourselves and our emotions into the room. So this refuge, the site becomes like a refuge where perhaps no other place can be. And when I'm talking about rituals, I'm talking about something as simple as rearranging the chairs in the room into a circle before class starts. And I have discovered that a number of my colleagues do the same thing, that our rooms are designed for auditorium style, for lecture. They're not designed for interactive work or in a way that we can all see and acknowledge each other. So every morning when I come into my class, I rearrange the seats, and students have actually helped me with that. So given the state of the world, some people have asked me, why focus on wholeness and joy instead of what's really happening, as if wholeness and joy are not also really happening. Whole does not mean perfect, and many of us are all too familiar, weighted down and weary with the realities of living in this particular moment. And so what we don't have in many times are the practices needed to see through the despair in order to take action, even if that action is getting off your floor and washing your face. So I want us to just think about that. What do we mean when we say action? Does it have to be something as going out and protest? Does it have to be writing a book? Does it have to be something grand? Sometimes it's just something very simple. And I'm also finding that everyone does not have an understanding of what whole looks like or feels like, since so much of our time is spent focused on the fragmentation of our lives. And I think about something that the poet M. Norbise Philip reminds me of in an interview that she did. And she says, asking the question of what if we just ask that question, what if, it frees us to imagine other possibilities in our lives, and it frees us from being crushed by victimhood. And so two of the things that I'm interested in always in living and teaching is liberation. Like, how do we get free and stay free? And how do we find joy in our lives? So that question about what if, you may not have an answer to it, but you know that this can't be all there is in life. Right? That can't be all that there is in life. And so the what if also invites us to imagine ourselves as whole, imperfect beings who are perfect just for ourselves, right? That what if allows us to really challenge that idea of this is it, this is how it's always been done, right? That narrative. And it challenges us to ask for more than what's visible if we want to live fully and free. And it also demands very slowly and insistently that we think about how we're going to make the change. It makes us responsible for that. And if we consider wholeness and joy first, what if we do that? And what if we set the bar higher than surviving and fighting every day? What if we imagine the different type of society? And what if we committed to making that community right now? So those of you who are with us this afternoon, I'm thinking that in your own ways, that you have already committed to making a different community because you've asked the what if questions, right? What if? So it's with these experiences and these ideas in my head from Juba, the 2016 election, the thinking about what if, the responding to many things on campus, in my communities, nationally, internationally, about our current situations and helping us to move, us as the communities in which I work, to move beyond just the fear in which we live in. So it's all of these things that led me to teach a class that's not often taught in my department, and that is the senior graduate level Black Feminisms class. So just some things that you can, I taught it fall 2017. It is an interdisciplinary course. Black Studies was interdisciplinary. It was multiracial, multigender, multisexuality. The class was capped at 10, 17 students registered, including undergraduates, and I unfortunately had to tell them, due to protocol, they couldn't take the class. 14 students in the end ended up signing up for the class from all over campus, and we agreed to squeeze into this really small room. And our focus was on we who believe in freedom, right? We who believe in freedom. If you are familiar with Ella Baker's work and her words, you know that the rest of that is we who believe in freedom cannot rest. But the course just wasn't focused on that. It was asking everyone to rethink and think about what did it mean that freedom seekers and fighters could not rest? What did that mean for the value and exhaustion of Black women's labor? What did not being able to rest or freedom mean for their allies or their companions who may not be women or Black or identify as either of those things? And as with all things, the poet in me, I wanted students to contemplate the words they used and repeated. And I'm conscious of also that happens to be one of my phrases, so I'm constantly interrogating what that means. So this is our class structure. We met once a week. We had weekly readings that ranged from short essays, poetry. In fact, we began with Nikki Giovanni's Nikki Rosa, which challenges, again, these narratives of fragmentation and just dysfunction in communities. We had movies, we had discussions, we had journaling, and we had 3 formal assignments. That's it. A personal statement, a research statement, and a final project. That could have been anything that the students wanted and needed. If they needed to get a dissertation chapter done, dissertation chapter it was. If they wanted to present at a conference or write a proposal for a grant, we worked on that. So again, just a little bit of a different class structure. And so why so few assignments? Part of it is because each of these assignments, they may look simple, but as you know, they are not simple, because writing a personal statement, particularly one modeled after the Combahee River Collective, one of the earlier collective statements that really outlines what it is to be Black and woman and queer and living in an oppressive society, what's needed, what's wanted, and naming that takes a little bit of time. You can't do that overnight. Matter of fact, you can't do that in a month. Sometimes you can't even do that in a year or a couple of years or 50 years, right? So I knew it was going to require them to be fully engaged in some really deep work about themselves, their beliefs, their lives, and their research, and how all of that will link. How that would link. And so one of the things about thinking about contemplative practices, of course, is that whatever practices we engage in over a period of time, they really help us to do just this. So that the deeper level work that we do on ourselves and our beliefs and our lives really impacts and shapes what our research is going to be, how that research is going to be, who is going to be impacted by that research. And so I also wanted students to have the time and the space to think and rethink, decide how to act, and not feel bad and not be shamed or feel shameful about not having a response or an answer to something right away. Really very important. I wanted them to spend as much time reflecting and learning in that manner as I wanted them to spend reading all the theoretical texts that we were reading. So Black Studies is an interdisciplinary field, which means that everything that we did came through that lens. So that may have included law, like Kimberly Crenshaw's work on intersectionality, literature, history, spoken word, higher ed. I also invited women I knew who were artists and scholars and community workers to meet with the class in person or virtually if they lived out of state. So maybe one week we had someone come to talk about feminist studies and lesbian studies. One day someone came to talk about what it was like to be a Ghanaian woman. Somebody else came to talk to us about Black women in pornography and pleasure. And someone else came to talk to us about community work. How do you actually develop a plan for community, and how do you bring that into the space? And so thinking about these people who work with us, so Alexis Gums, Nana Amoa, Marsha Horsley, and LaShonda Crow Storm, it gave the students an opportunity to see what it meant to do actual community work. And so here are some of the topics that we talked about: the Black feminism and womanism, intersectionality, slavery, rape, domestic violence, spirituality and sacred praxis was very important. Cynthia Dillard's work, Black men in feminism, and women in Brazil, Liberia, and South Sudan. So we're talking about a really very broad scope in a 16 weeks. And so how do you begin a 16-week class that covers such a wide range of heavy topics, especially when you know that it's likely that some of your students have family or individual experiences of intergenerational and more recently related traumas? How do you even help students enter the theory and history that you know will re-traumatize them and assure them that you will do minimum harm, right? You enter a garden. I knew already how small our room would be. I knew that we would have little space to move around each other. The garden, therefore, was a place where we could listen to the wind, consider what it is to be loved and tended to with such care that you grow beyond what had been expected of you. It was a place where we could imagine being free. It was a place where we could imagine that it was okay to have a process and to follow that process. It was a place where we could see different things in different stages of growth and development. But it was also the place where we could ask questions just freely and honestly about what we did not know. And simple things, well, you know, how does that flower grow? Like, how long does it take to plant, you know, a geranium? How long does it take that tree to grow? And so the point being that being in that space really very comfortably to get people accustomed to, instead of saying, well, why don't you know that? Or, well, you know, that person doesn't know that, or I should know that, that just becoming comfortable with the idea of asking questions from a place of wanting to know, and also being able to say, well, what would you like to know about something? Because there's no better teacher, you know, than being in a garden, no better teacher than a garden. So on day one of our class, these are the things that we did. As you can see, we visited the Hilltop Garden and Nature Center. It is a place on campus, not far from the main areas of campus. And we stood beneath the trees, some of us barefoot. We stood in a circle. We began breathing in unison, and then we did libation and prayer. I invited each of the people in the class to acknowledge a woman ancestor who they wanted to actually honor as part of the class, and who they wanted to bring into the class with them. We heard stories about the women that we love. We had a community meal, so I had a meal catered to the garden, and we also had things from the garden itself. For this class, because it was so small, I was able to buy journals, different types of journals, as well as drawing materials for students. And so the entire class was spent eating, talking, and decorating our journals, responding to some very personal questions about thinking about who we were, what we wanted to get out of the class. And then afterwards, we had the opportunity to walk the garden paths and the meditation areas. And so building into that first day, very thankful that it was lovely, that it did not rain, it was not cold. It's one of the benefits of teaching a class in the fall, depending on where you are, but just to be able to walk and experience the grass, the flowers, the butterflies, all of that on the first day. So this gives you an idea of what that area looks like. And I'd like to acknowledge that this garden, and particularly one of the items, a huge cantaloupe that we shared on our first day, is the result and care of my beautiful partner and husband, Luis Andre Bispo de Jesus. And so it was at his invitation and also that we were able to come to this space. here is one of the meditation spaces. So the bench that began this presentation is also one of the meditation spaces. So there are actually 3 spaces that have been created here, and students were invited to enter those spaces, to sit for a while, to listen. No rush whatsoever, since we were not working within a roomed format or a traditionally roomed format. So beginning the class in the garden with a meal and journals, drawing, a walking meditation through the grounds, the point was to introduce students to another way of connecting to each other, but it also offered them a place where they could find refuge if they needed it. So many students still don't know that this place exists on campus, but for students with whom I was working, upon discovering it, they revisited the garden whenever possible, because it's also a place where you can grow your own food if you're willing to put the work in, and to have a garden with someone else. So in class, we transferred some of these practices in terms of the meditation, silence, and deep listening. So deep listening, that process of listening with one's whole self and responding with compassionate questioning when we are invited to respond. Deep listening was something that was needed in this class, where we knew, based on the syllabus and based on current events, that it was possible that we would open up new wounds for some people. But the other thing that it did is that it opened up for us our hearts, and again, this idea of what if. So the garden, the paying attention to how things were growing, transferred into our class, and paying attention to how we were reading the text, particularly poetry or more difficult text. It allowed us to begin asking questions without shame, because sometimes we know that we're all sitting in a class and we're reading something, or we're sitting in a meeting and we're reading something, or out, and we have no clue what it is that it's saying. We don't understand the theory, we don't understand the word, nothing. This gave everyone the permission to ask, well, do you understand what this is? What exactly is this saying? So all of these things moved from first day throughout the rest of the semester. One of the things that I would like to focus on, however, is on the journals, because the journals are always fun. And so students were invited and encouraged to journal every day, inside and outside of the class. They were encouraged to use the colored pencils and pens, collage, anything that made the journal theirs. And they used the journals to take notes in class. So imagine you're sitting in a class and almost no one has a laptop open. People took their notes in the journals, and they also exchanged information with each other through the journals. On several occasions, students had made notes of what another classmate had said or community member had said, or even what they discovered on the way to class. So this transference, again, of walking in the garden, being in the garden, paying attention, provided a way for really a heightened sensibility or an awareness of even walking from the bus stop to class. What was there? What was present? And one of the things I do is I ask people not to run to class, especially in the wintertime. Get to class as soon as you can, but don't run, don't rush to do that. So it gave them permission to also pay attention to what was happening around them. But the journaling, however, was a very deliberate choice in being in alignment with Black feminist theories of breaking silences, rewriting narratives, creating new narratives, reflecting on the self, class, history, when and where you could enter, and also self-naming. And so through the journaling, students could do all of these things, merging themselves and the self and course reflection into a unified document. And of course, what I wanted them to do was to challenge what it meant to create and produce scholarship, and in what forms. And so upon reviewing their journals at the end of the semester, they discovered whole new things about themselves, as well as new ideas for projects. And most importantly, they discovered what was relevant to their lives. And so how that works out at the end of the semester or throughout the semester is this is where ideas went for funding for a conference. And so, for example, one student, her final project was actually a proposal for funding for a project, and she received that funding. But it also helped her to reconstruct and reimagine what she could do in higher education. And she secured a job doing just that. She got a job where she could use all of her creative skills and abilities through this particular lens, and using some of these practices to help students, other students themselves, or younger students, really realize their full potential. And of course, all of the journaling would lead to adjustments in our syllabus, depending on what was needed at the time. So another part of the garden, I like this particular place in the garden because I feel like there should be a beach on the other side of that instead of just grass, but it makes me feel really good. Again, as I've said before, our classroom space was very small. Sometimes we were competing with the air conditioner or the heating system or whatever construction was going on outside, but no complaints ever. No complaints ever, because just beginning again in that garden, it was an invitation to build community by each person and to become committed to each other as part of that process. And so the journals themselves, I found that students were traveling with their journals. They were using their journals in other classes. They were carrying their journals to meetings with them, and it became the focal point of storing information, gathering information, and reflection. They could also share these journals with family and friends who did not understand exactly why school was important to them. And for students whose families who were here as immigrants or who had lived in refugee camps, the journals became a way for them to tie their different lives together without any shame, to actually walk through what processes they were undergoing and share their lives, in fact, with their family members. So what happens in a class like this when you encounter work you can't turn away from? And when the assignment makes you deeply reflect on that question, what does it mean to be human, and on the human condition itself? So I just want to talk a little bit about Pray the Devil Back to Hell. This is a documentary that details the struggles of women in Liberia across religions and different ethnic groups in their efforts to save their children, especially their boy children who are being taken and put to fight in the country. And so the day that we watched the documentary, of course, we are journaling about it. Of course, we are in a very tight space, but a student began to cry, and not just, wipe her face crying, but just crying audibly. And so I asked, would you like us to stop watching the documentary? And the student said no. And that immediately opened up the space for another student to cry. And so we found ourselves watching this documentary, sobbing in class. And so when I asked after the documentary, like, what is it? What is it that had moved them so much, it disturbed them so much about this documentary that they began crying and wanted to support each other in that crying? The responses were that just thinking about what other human beings did to each other. And it could have ended there, but the question then became, what can we do to change this? So essentially, what if we imagined a different life? What if we imagined something different? And so they used that opportunity to pull together all of the other components of the course that we had been talking about in terms of moving from inaction to action and seeking out what deeply moves them in order to get them to a place to be in a community in which they could ask for help. So it has been a year now since I've taught this class, and I know definitely that it has had an impact on me and the students, because mourning together and holding space together in anywhere at all, but particularly in spaces where it seems counter to do that, and certainly revolutionary to do that. It has a major impact on you, but it also helps us decide what could be sustainable in our communities. And as a result, going back to those final projects, people actually created some projects, one that has been launched nationally, to make the kind of changes that we were talking about every day. And so the journals, again, continue to be that place where we can return to say, well, what's happened? And also trace, like, when did we have that initiation into doing this work in such a way that we knew we were willing to commit to it for a good portion of our lives. I'm looking at the time, and I want to just let you know that there are some references here that I can provide for you. And what you're looking at, except for the first and the second one, the first and the last one, which are directed to contemplative practices, the others are not. They are texts in which I have found the possibility to use contemplative practices such as deep dialogue and deep listening to introduce students to different ways of reading a text. And so this is another place in the garden. I would like to end here, actually, so that we can have time to talk. And I'm just going to invite you to just spend some time, just a few minutes, looking at this beautiful arrangement and looking at the expansion of it. And I'd like to thank each of you for agreeing to share part of your afternoon with us. And if we could just inhale together again. And exhale. And inhale. And exhale. And inhale again. And exhale. So I'd like to thank you very much. And so we'll be open to questions or comments and thoughts at this particular moment.
Thank you so much for sharing your work with us, Abegunde. That was really wonderful. I also appreciated the opportunity to mentally travel to a sunny garden in Indiana rather than the gray, slightly snowing Western Mass. So as mentioned, this is the time to submit any questions that you have that you'd like to share. So far, I've just received one, so I'm going to give people a few moments to just settle and collect your thoughts and send them into the questions box that should be on your right-hand side panel. Okay, well, now questions are flooding in, which is great, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can on the call. So the first one that was received actually earlier on is how might you apply these rituals to a larger class size, say 50 students or more?
So one of the ways, if you're working with a class of 50 students, 75 students, is to think about even if you're working auditorium style or if you're in an auditorium, is if you know you want to do this ahead of time, is thinking about at the beginning of the year how you may put students in smaller groups to work throughout the year. So if you are lecturing a large group, you may want to consider what if those groups, again, depending on your format, depending on the class, how might you break those students up into, say, maybe groups of 10, if possible. If you're working in an auditorium that gives you enough space for your students to move front, back, and center, that's one way to do that, right? And so, again, thinking through what it is that your outcome is, if the outcome is to have students get to know each other without doing group work, but putting them in groups and having them work on particular projects or questions, if they have to address a particular question or issue in the class, this would be the time to have them, just the formation of the group itself becomes a ritual, right? In a large group, you can also invite everyone to simply sit and to take a moment to breathe without moving. So again, determining what type of ritual and what type of outcome you want to have first would be important.
Thank you. The next question was how or do you, in fact, work on syllabus adjustments with the students in the course?
Yes. So in the beginning of the class, when we review the syllabus, I let them know that it's their responsibility to read the syllabus and for us to come back. And again, this depends on the particular class, what it is that's not clear or what they think that may be adjusted. And what needs to be adjusted. Sometimes that's around the number of absences. Sometimes it is around assessments. And midway through the semester, I take a check-in to see what's working, what is not working for students. And then we think about, like, if I feel like we've covered some things and the texts that we're supposed to look at are just going to be redundant, we talk about what we need to remove and what we need to add. Like, what would we like to see more of? And we do that. I make sure that I note the date it has been changed. I share it with them, and so they have one more opportunity to review it and agree to it. This is also in line with us developing community agreements at the beginning of class, and that governs everything from civility, how it is that people should even hand in their work, what it is, how to think through certain ideas in the class. So yes. It's a regular point of checking in.
That's great.
I just want to, before you, I understand that I'm not being seen and I can't see anyone, and I don't know where that is. It was earlier for us, so I apologize for that because I would have loved to see some people, but.
So the attendees are typically not viewable, but
okay.
yeah, but I am sorry as well that we can't see you. Hopefully we can have another chance at some point. Someone just wanted to share a quick inspiration that she, up until now, had not thought of using the farm on her campus for some contemplative practice with students. So that was also nice.
Marvelous.
Another question was, have you used these approaches with other faculty and staff on your campus, or is this something that you've just done in this class particularly?
I do them in all of my classes. At one time, I made the mistake of not showing up to a meeting with senior administrators, and someone pointed out not showing up to a meeting with senior administrators with my bells, with my tinctures or singing bowl, and someone remarked that they missed the bells. And so, yes, I incorporate this into my meetings. I am also the founding director of the Graduate Mentoring Center on my campus, and so embedded into the center's work is contemplative practice, balance, and community, and an attention to culture. So the bells and bowls are with me at all times. When I go to meetings, it's how I begin a meeting. If it is my meeting, regardless of whether there are senior admins or senior faculty there. So yes. The question might be after that, well, how did people take it? They weren't quite sure what to do at first. And the first time, in fact, I did this in a classroom with students, I had a student begin crying. I am insistent on us being slow and taking time. And in my current class, Contemporary Social Issues in the African American Community, I have actually built in nap time. I built in a 20-minute nap time in line with Tricia Hershey-Patrick's work on napping and nap ministry. One, because students were tired, and two, it is a contemporary social issue, the lack of sleep in communities, right? And people really appreciated that. So yes, once people understand it and once they see the benefit of it, of slowing down, it's amazing how people ask for it and come to expect it.
Mm. Yeah. We could use a nap practice here. Maybe we'll do that at the next conference. Maybe just a sort of more practical question was about the journals and the food that were provided for that first class in the garden, and where that funding came from.
Mm-hmm. So journals, I have, the food came from me. It was a small enough class to be able to do that, right? If the class were any bigger, I probably would have asked my department for support in that, because I've done that before. Journals, I keep journals everywhere. I keep journals as part of the center. I keep personal journals. So that was a possibility to be able to do that. In classes where it's too big, for example, on Amazon, you can buy journals in packs of 3 and 4 for not a lot of money. In classes where it's really too big and the cost is prohibitive to purchase journals, I have asked people to donate journals, and I have also asked students if they would bring a journal that they would like to write in, because then this gives them a choice of what type of writing material they'd like to use.
That's great. I think maybe this will be the last question, or second to last. This came up more than once, and the question was if there were prompts for the journaling practice that you offer.
There were not always prompts. In this particular class, students were instructed to respond sometimes to what they were reading in any way that they wanted to do so. When there was a particular assignment that we had to do, then there was a prompt. And occasionally there were those, in terms of having them think through definitions or self-naming and self-defining. Otherwise, and part of it is also, it was a 700 level graduate level class, and I wanted them to also develop a habit of writing and reflection without the prompts. And so it worked in two ways. If there was an assignment that needed to be responded to, yes, a prompt for the assignment in a very particular way. And then other times it was open writing or free writing, and that was also structured. In other classes, I also structure writing time. For the Graduate Mentoring Center, we have, during our retreat, a structured writing time in which there may be a prompt or there may not be a prompt.
Thank you. This was sort of a two-part question. Well, not two-part question, but this was a follow-up question, and regarding the guest speakers that you had come to the class, and whether or not it was difficult to bring coherence to so many different voices with those lectures.
It was not. Part of it is that the people that I asked to come came at particular points in the semester to address a particular issue. And the class was designed in such a way that everyone was able to, through conversation, see the link. So the class is designed in particular topics. So moving from, say, wholeness and spiritual practice, and spiritual practice itself, to history through consciousness and knowledge, through pleasure, through Black men and feminism, social justice. So they were linked in ways that the larger topics asked people to consider how they created knowledge and how they shared that knowledge. And so one person, community activist, And in fact, everyone who came was a community activist of some sort, just in different areas. Even the scholar coming to talk about pornography and pleasure is a community and social justice activist. So again, reframing what it is when we say these terms, you know, freedom, social justice, the academy or scholarship, community, Black studies as a discipline relies on community and the interaction of the community in order to teach and to learn. The other question that I've gotten from people is also about funding, like how do I pay, or how do I pay my speakers, even in my the current class, is that I rely on the goodness of community and asking some people who are very busy, some people who are nationally known in their fields or their institutions. I asked, in fact, my community of sister friends, would they be willing to give an hour of their time? And so in thinking about how we work in relationship to one another, it's something that I encourage other community workers, other faculty, other staff, is to think about who is within your community group and who can you ask to come into your classroom, because we all don't have budgets. I don't have a budget to actually pay a speaker to come into my class, either virtually or in person. But I do have sister friends who will drive down from the next city up, who will come for an hour or two, in fact, to do a presentation for students and help them understand what it means to build community and the importance of activism work in their lives and how to link that back to their research.
Wow, thank you. That, I think, is actually just a perfect place to end for today. So we all leave thinking about building that community. I just want to thank you again, Abegunde, for sharing your work with us, and all of you for joining us this afternoon. To remind you, this webinar has been recorded and it will be available on the website soon. Our webinars are made possible by your support, and so we invite you to make a donation and check out our webinar archive at contemplativemind.org. You may not be aware of this since we have such a wide reach, but in actuality, the Center for Contemplative Mind is just 3 full-time staff members. So your donations really do make a difference, no matter what the size. Thank you again, Abegunde. That was absolutely wonderful, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so very much, and anyone may feel free and happy to contact me. My contact information is there at any time. And again, I'm just glad that you were able to spend the time this afternoon. Appreciate it very much.
Okay, thank you. Be well.
Thank you. Be well.